coming on, Hope. It's brilliant. I love your stuff. I love the kind of positivity of your Instagram. I mean, it's like a blog and a journal and a help everybody guide, isn't it? It's a combination. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, basically everything I'm thinking.
It's a brain dump.
Yeah, pretty much. I think some days it does feel a bit like that.
But it's amazing because it's one of the, there's so much on the internet now about anorexia and eating disorders, and so much really negative stuff, and so much ignorant, I mean, that sounds a terrible thing to say, but so much ignorant writing that is judgmental and unhelpful. And so yours is that beautiful combination of lived experience and real understanding and knowledge and hope and survival, which is what makes it so special, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to do with it, was to paint kind of like this really accurate picture of recovery, like the ups and the downs and the things that worked for me, and not like telling people what they should and shouldn't be doing, but being like, this is what I do, this works for me, like what do you guys want to do, what kind of works for you, and to try and get more of a discussion going, whilst at the same time trying to get rid of, I think, a lot of the stigma and the like lack of understanding around eating disorders that's still just so out there.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because there's so much chat about it, and particularly in lockdown, there's so much chat about eating disorders being on the rise, but not so much understanding of why that is. And I know you've been quite vocal on it being the perfect storm, haven't you, on the news and in the media recently? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I think what I've seen, and like from my own experience as well, like it has been really difficult, and I think it's difficult for everybody at the moment. But for people with eating disorders, what I've kind of noticed is that the way the eating disorder works is like it tries to suck you back in and to try and give you some kind of control over something, whilst at the same time trying to numb all of those emotions. Yeah. And I know, like at the start of lockdown for me, like I was nervous about what was going to happen. I was then kind of worried about work because I'm a freelancer. So then like it was all of this stuff going on in my head, and I knew that kind of like anorexic part of my brain would be like trying to get me back in, trying to be like, if you count your calories, it will all be okay. Like restrict a little bit, everything will be fine. And I think that's the really scary thing, is it actually does work in the short term when you do that. So you have to be so strong to like resist it, don't you?
Exactly. And you have to have some understanding, don't you, that the reason that it comes flooding back in, as you said a minute ago, is actually that particularly during lockdown, almost nothing is within our control. Mm-hmm. Not only are we not in control, but it feels like, the world is out of control. And so the only thing that you can control, that works, that is safe, and that has been really helpful in the past, is your food and your calories and your eating.
And I think that is the scary thing of it. And I think for me, it was like reminding myself that actually when I was at that point, I was never happy. And I don't want to live my life kind of dictated by food and calories. But again, it's a hard thing. And I think as well with lockdown, it's like other things like the exercise stuff comes up, and people not being able to get face-to-face support is challenging. And it just is like, I guess like this ongoing list of things that keep cropping up. And I feel like every other week there's a different thing. And even as we're coming out of lockdown, there's like this fear that like people are going to comment on our weight, or if you haven't lost weight in this time, are people going to be judging you? And I think even if you haven't had an eating disorder, like you still feel that everyday judgment of diet culture and weight, and there is a fear for everyone around that, I think, but it's just made worse if you've had an eating disorder.
I agree completely with all of that, and it is made worse partly because of the control issues, but partly, as you say, the lure of the safety. And it doesn't feel safe if you've not been in that position, but that safety of the anorexic voice going, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to keep you safe, if you come back to me, then you'll feel better. It's like that voice in your head, or that, when it becomes more punitive, it's that bully in your head, but at the beginning it's that kind of safety voice in your head, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that is the scary part of it. And I know, like, I think the frustrating thing, like I remember when I relapsed a couple of years ago, actually, like I was so aware of what was going on in my head, and I was so kind of like, I don't want to get really unwell again, but I can't not listen to that voice. And it was just this constant battle going on. And I feel like in a way, like I'm lucky this time around, because when it kind of felt like it was trying to get me back at the start of lockdown, I was able to shut it down very quickly. But I think for a lot of people, they can't always do that.
They can't always do that. They're normal support structures, because
yeah,
when you recover, you put in a whole load of structures into your life, don't you? Be it friends or therapy or exercise, or it doesn't, or work or art or whatever it is, but most of it isn't in your own space 24
mm,
hours a day. And
yeah,
that all suddenly disappeared. So all of those structures that people had to support them have gone as well.
yeah.
And that's been really, really difficult, as well, as you say, with all the kind of stuff out in the media, all over social, the negative as well as the positive. The pro-ana-sites, I mean, have been really active during this time.
Yeah, and I think that's also like another thing that's been really scary is kind of speaking to a lot of, like, I'm going to say predominantly younger people, but I'm sure that adults have been affected by this too, but people who are getting coached online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, particularly on things like Instagram and gaming sites, like, we're just seeing more and more people, like, in effect grooming young people to develop eating disorders. And because we've all got so much more time, and because we're always on our phones at the moment, and in lockdown, like, I know I spend more time on my phone now than I probably did before, because there's not much else to do. And so people will use that, and people will be able to then kind of crack into those people that are more vulnerable. And I think in itself, like, that's a massive issue that needs to be tackled. But it's one of those, people don't know where to start with it.
No, and I mean, the pro-ana sites, from a kind of a clinical perspective, from an internet perspective, they've been being shut down as soon as they emerge, as soon as you find them, for a good few years now. The problem is that no sooner do you shut one down, another one's up.
Yeah.
And keeping up with them and finding them is so very, very difficult. And young people often say, well, it's sharing of it's just sharing about how to manage it, or it's sharing of tips, or it's that, it feels like a sharing, and it's not a sharing. It's a really damaging, dangerous thing.
Yeah, and I think, like, one of the reasons it's so damaging, isn't it, is because it's so competitive as an illness. And it's like, and I think that's the thing with social, is we can't monitor everything. And I know that I'm very vocal about not putting out before and after pictures, because I think that stuff's really triggering. But I don't always think others agree with that. And so you then see a heap load of content from, like, high profile influencers who feel like it's okay to share those kind of pictures. And I think actually that stuff is probably just as bad as the pro-ana sites. But again, it's hard to monitor it.
It's really hard to monitor it. And all the messages that are coming out, even if it's not from accounts like that, but it's just the general messages that are out there, are really difficult at the moment as well. And because, in lockdown, the whole issue of food has been tricky. For different people, for different reasons. So food is a massive thing. It's also, food has got so much communication to it anyway, hasn't it? We use it to celebrate, to reward, to punish, to share, to grieve, to whatever. It has a whole meaning.
Yeah.
The whole food issue is tricky. But one of the things also from your account that I found really helpful to me as a psychologist working with lots of anorexia is that your account is such a real helpful account to people who are struggling. And what you can give, I and my colleagues couldn't give, because your journey is so beautifully documented that it can give hope on the same level. It's not like a professional talking to someone. It's like and I thought that's been tremendous and really, really helpful. And quite a lot of your stuff I've shown people I work with and said, is this helpful to you? Because I think it's great. And it has been really helpful. And it's got me thinking about the difference between the kind of the professional and the non-professional support, and how we can use them together, rather than see them as two separate things. And was wondering if you had thoughts about that, or thoughts about the differences and which bits of each is helpful and less helpful.
So yeah, I definitely think that there should be, like, more collaboration done with, like, professionals and kind of people with lived experience. And I think that should be in a number of ways. I guess for me, like, part of it is around normalizing that conversation, but also giving people that hope and being like, I've been through it, I know what it's like. And I think when I was in hospital, like, quite often the kind of health professionals would tell me something, and I would be like, you don't understand, like, you've not been here. Or the thing they always used to tell me, actually, which used to really annoy me, was they'd be like, your weight won't keep going up. And I'd be like, you don't know that. You've got no idea whether my weight will keep going up, particularly at the start, when you feel like your weight goes up really quickly and mentally you just can't keep up with it. But actually, like, if I had someone who'd been through an eating disorder who was like to me, actually, your weight doesn't keep going up, and kind of reassured me on that level, I think it's those conversations that would really, really help me within that. And I think there is a time and a place for professional support, and I don't think that kind of people with lived experience can replace that, but I think there should be a way that it can be done kind of maybe like in tandem with each other. So having someone coming in and talking to patients, and then having professional support afterwards, and actually a huge I kind of do a little bit of it, not a huge amount, but I'm trying to do more of it at the moment, is actually going into hospital settings, so whether it's NHS settings or doing a lot of it with the Priory, and actually speaking to their patients to get them to understand, actually, this is what you can do, like if you start to recover. And I think for me, the thing that I can offer is getting them to understand that actually how eating disorders make us feel is like just amazing, and it makes you feel like you're invincible, but actually it stops at some point.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that people feel like they know it's going to stop. And I think that's where I can, like, that's when I feel like people with lived experience can come in and be like, actually, it's not letting you live your life. Like, life can be so much better. And it's hard, like it's such hard work, but it's,
I always say to people, it's the hardest journey that you'll ever go on. There is no battle more difficult than recovery from eating disorders.
Yeah,
and I really do believe that, because with alcohol or drugs or any other kind of addiction even, you can remove the substance from your life and never ever touch it again. But with food, it's life sustaining, you know, without it we die. So you can't live a life by removing that particular trigger or that particular substance from your life. So you have to find a way through, which is so different from almost any other comparable difficulty.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think as well, like the physical aspect of it is hard, isn't it? Because you don't, like, I know when I was unwell, everyone knew I wasn't okay. But like now, although I'm like in a really good space with stuff, actually, like when I have a difficult day, you have to talk about it. And so I think sometimes it's harder because you're like, you want to express how awful you feel, but you know that if you just restricted for a day, it would just kind of feel easier than talking about it.
And that's
so I think in that sense,
on a day at a time thing, restriction will always win in terms of making you feel better and making you feel in control and making you feel like you've got a sense of agency over your life. But it doesn't take very long, does it, before that flips and suddenly the anorexia controls you. You have no agency, you have no control over your life as it spirals away from you.
Yeah, and I think that's what I hate about it, I think. And like even in recovery, like actually even today, like I had my lunch, and I had a bit of a bigger lunch than normal just because I was a bit more hungry. And then I had a slice of toast like an hour later, and I was like stressing about it afterwards. And I was like, why am I getting stressed about this? Like, I'm hungry, like I can eat if I'm hungry. And I think that's the thing, isn't it, with recovery? Like it sometimes hits you, and then you have to be so proactive at just being like, no, I don't need to listen to it. It's not going to make me feel better. And I think remembering actually, like how much it shuts down your life and stops you living.
Yeah, and remembering too, you know, that starvation or restriction, whichever one we want to call it, but starvation for the sake of this, changes your brain biology. And so many people don't realize that. And I think it's a really important thing, because when you're stuck in the middle of anorexia, actually your brain is not working as your brain was working before it. Physiologically isn't functioning in the same way. And so the things that would have, you know, helped or hindered then will be different, because it's a different brain. It's a brain that is altered physiologically by the act of starvation.
Scary. I think I love that. I think that science stuff's always really helpful though, isn't it? I
think it's brilliant, because I think then also it relieves the sense of blame that people have. You know, this is not your well brain. It genuinely has altered. It's not your fault. It's not about you. I mean, it is about you, but it's not about you causing difficulties. You've now got a brain in an altered state. We need to reverse the biology by putting more food in. But that's a concept that I know that some people, haven't heard, and other people find really quite challenging.
Yeah, and I think like I heard that, I think just before I went into hospital, but at that point I was probably too unwell to really listen and take it seriously. And I think that's the thing, it's about when you have those conversations, isn't it? And when you do it, because I know like quite often with health professionals, there's a tendency, not with everyone, but with some, to try and shock people into eating and to scare them into what's going on. But actually, for a lot of people, that shock stuff doesn't work. And you have to start finding a way to accept it on your own and looking at your own evidence-based stuff. And I think it would be interesting, like, yeah, maybe in the future they'll let you scan your brain or something when you're starving yourself, so you could see the difference
They have,
properly. Oh,
they
do they
have.
do that now? Okay.
I mean, there have been some trials. I was involved in one many years ago, looking at the change in blood flow through the brain, and I can't remember the outcome because it was at the very beginning. But that was quite novel then, but that was a long time ago. There is quite a lot of that work now. The one that we all rely on, because it is the Minnesota experiment, which you must have heard about, but you can't replicate it because it would be unethical.
Yeah, that's true.
You can't take a bunch of fit, healthy young men and halve their calorie intake and go, oh look, you're all developing anorexia. But the beauty of that study was that it proved unequivocally that starvation itself causes anorexia rather than anorexia leading to starvation. So it was that both and. But that also, going back to what we were saying a minute ago about the collaboration of professional and non-professional help, that is one of the areas it would be lovely, is, someone like you going, the brain does alter actually. What all these annoying medics tell you is actually right. And when you do get to this percentage weight for height, suddenly you feel a bit better. Yes, all the emotions bubble up again, but suddenly you feel different, and they're not just being annoying.
Yeah,
they're being annoying, but they're being annoying and it's
truthful.
It's actual truthful. So that would be a really lovely collaboration. I think there must be more scope for collaboration on this.
Yeah, and I think like maybe as well, like in things around like campaigning as well. Like I do, like obviously do a lot of work campaigning with the government around eating disorder diagnosis, but actually getting other young or adults, anyone, to actually get involved in that sort of stuff and like get them to feel empowered to own their stories and start to share it. Because I think quite often when you're in recovery from an eating disorder, your whole identity is the eating disorder. So then you have to find other things that you want to do or other things you like to do. And then you have to basically like create yourself again. And so I think quite often actually, if we felt empowered to share our stories and be okay with that, that would help us get that purpose back and help us kind of push ourselves to get to that better space potentially.
I think you're completely right. And it is also often at the end of a piece of work when someone's kind of done 90% of the real grind, and then you get towards the end and there's a crisis, and that crisis is so often around, but who am I going to be? Who am I going to be, and what's my best friend going to be, and where am I going to go when it gets tough? Because the anorexia acts like a best friend as well, doesn't it? Or the eating disorder is like your best mate and part of your identity. And so it's really tough at that end bit when you're suddenly going, oh my gosh, but what now, and who am I now? And as you say, having someone who's done that journey alongside could be unbelievably powerful and really helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. I think having lived experience is just crucial when you're in recovery from an eating disorder, and maybe with other illnesses as well. But I think particularly with eating disorders, because you do have to change your identity, you have to reframe how you live, you have to understand about food, and also just kind of seeing that people can live their lives not dictated by food, I think.
Yeah, and that is so important, that you can live your life and get to a place where food is what it ought to be, which is fuel, and hopefully enjoyable, delicious fuel. But if it's not enjoyable and delicious, at least it's fuel rather than some kind of punitive, terrifying thing that you have to have at least 3 times a day on schedule. Because that's what it becomes, isn't it? In hospital or something, it's like this 6 times a day trauma almost.
And I think that with having someone who's been through it as well, I guess with the whole hating of food thing, actually seeing that someone else has had an eating disorder and they now like the food, actually it then would help alleviate some of that guilt that you probably get at the start of it. Which is something I think we don't often talk about, that actually, like the guilt around eating when you're in recovery, and then the guilt around actually like when you leave a hospital or when you leave that setting kind of where you're getting more care, actually how are you managing that guilt on a day-to-day basis,
and also the guilt of making a choice to eat once you leave that care, because it's easier to kind of go, well, they're making me, so I have to. Particularly towards the end of recovery and then into kind of ongoing recovery like you are now, that every day I make a choice to do this, and then you're kind of owning it, and the guilt is very different then, I think.
I think it is, and you're able to push it away a little bit more, probably the more you push it in other people. But I guess at the moment, like in lockdown, that's why probably for some people it's so challenging, because where a lot of people are in isolation, or they're not seeing their friends or family as much, which means they have to choose to have that meal on their own and then sit with that guilt afterwards. And they might have coping mechanisms in place around it. They might be doing it over the phone or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, they are still making that choice to have it. And that could be guilt they've never really felt in that sense.
And that guilt is unbelievably powerful, isn't it?
Mm.
Excruciating. So if you had one message at the moment to give to people who are recovering and struggling and, you know, with that juggle of losing a bit of their professional care, is there a single message you would want to give? Or
I think my message would be is, and this is probably going to sound really lame, but I always think, like, with with any eating disorder, like, you do think it's your best friend, and you get this real sense of value and purpose from it. But all of that stuff's short term and short lived. And so for me, it was about actually finding that purpose, thinking about those short term and long term goals, and actually realizing that if I did what the eating disorder wanted me to do, I wasn't going to achieve anything that I really wanted to in my life. And whilst you may think at the moment, like, it's fine, I can just do this for a little bit, actually, I would just encourage you to actually kind of push forward and keep challenging yourself in recovery.
You're so right. That's a lovely message, isn't it? And for us professionals working in it, I think my takeaway is certainly to find more and more areas in which we can collaborate with people who have done the recovery journey just like you, who are inspirational, really positive, and okay to come into the spaces and do that, because of course you have to be quite careful about when you bring someone back in, don't you? You can't do it too soon and things. So I think from a professional point, it's how can we collaborate more, and hopefully we can start to do that as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That would be awesome. So thank you so much for chatting to me today and coming on, and look forward to hopefully speaking more or working together in the future.
Yeah, that sounds lovely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.